The last way that you can use gels in your photography is gelling the main light. Now, I think when you gel the main light, you're committing to color all the way. So typically when I gel my main light, I'm often combining it with other lights and other colors throughout the scene. When you gel your main light, what you have to consider is that the modifier you're using on that main light will make a difference. Now, if you're using a soft modifier, that light is going to take on the quality of a soft modifier. So the gel, if it's on, let's say, a big softbox or a big umbrella, the quality of light is going to be soft. It's going to be less specular. The shadows are going to be less defined. If you shoot with a hard modifier, now the gel will take on the qualities of the hard modifier. It will be more specular, more defined shadows. So you do have to consider this. So we're going to take a look at this in action here. I've got two lights. Both of these are using the exact same blue gel, and I've taken a meter reading, so both of them are set to a reading of f8. When I take a photograph, however, you'll see that the light looks very different. The quality of light is different, but also the saturation. When you use a soft modifier, typically the saturation of that gel is a little less. It's not quite as rich. However, when you use a hard modifier, the color pumps up a little bit. And I think of it like this. Imagine that you have a photograph in Photoshop and you increase the contrast a little bit. You notice that when you increase contrast, you increase saturation. So the same thing is going to happen based on the modifiers you're using with your gels. So let's take a look at that in action. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to have on my zoom reflector metered at f8. Test. Perfect. Great. All right, so take a look at this photograph. What you'll see is if you look at the shadow beside her nose, it's very defined and very crisp, qualities of a hard light modifier. And then if you look at her cheekbone, do you see that highlight? It's very, very bright, very, very specular. When you use a hard modifier, contrast goes up. In other words, shadows get darker, highlights get brighter, saturation increases. So you can see that. You'll also notice that the light on the background isn't quite even, because when you're using that zoom reflector, there's not much of a spill or evenness to the light. And we're going to see how that changes when I switch over to a soft modifier. So I'm going to turn off that zoom reflector, and we're going to turn on an umbrella. And so now look at the shadow beside her nose. It's much more gradual, but also the skin, it looks much smoother. There aren't those specular highlights. You don't see quite as much texture, but the color isn't quite as vibrant. So when you're trying to decide what to do for your main light, what modifier to use, remember that quality of light still applies when you're using gels. Over here, I've used a large umbrella with diffusion. It's very similar to a softbox. So in your head, if you're trying to figure out the right modifiers, if you want softer quality of light, go for octaboxes, regular softboxes, shoot through umbrellas, large umbrellas with diffusion. Any of that is going to give you soft light. On the other hand, harder modifiers are going to be things like zoom reflectors, grids, bare bulb, magnum reflectors, anything that's small and silver or where the light is directly hitting the subject. Whereas with the soft light modifiers, it's usually a very large modifier and there'll be some diffusion. The diffusion cuts down on contrast. And so I've mentioned soft modifiers and hard modifiers, but there's also the kind of in between, and this is one that I'm going to use often throughout this class, which would be a beauty dish. In this case, it's going to be a white beauty dish that you'll see me using most often. A beauty dish, it's a little bit smaller, so it gives it a little more contrast. It's a little bit harder light, but it's white and it's bounce light, which makes it softer. So you're getting a little bit of the best of both worlds. And so often I'm using a beauty dish as the main light on my subject when I'm using gels, because I get flattering qualities of light, but I also get that pop and that saturation. It doesn't mean it's the only modifier to use, but that's one of the reasons you'll see that pop up very often in my setups. I mentioned that when I gel my main light, I usually add other gels to the scene. So let's actually transform this shot and make something colorful, one of our first creative shots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the blue zoom reflector on the left-hand side, so it'll give me that nice specularity. But then I'm going to change the color of the umbrella. And I'm thinking I'm going to go with some pretty saturated colors. We're going to go maybe a blue and let's do a magenta. Stephen, will you switch that out to a magenta? So I'm going to start here, and we're going to take a photo and see if I need to make any additions, and then we're going to continue to build. All right, so zoom reflector on gives me that blue specularity on one side of her face, soft magenta from the large umbrella, and let's take a shot and see what it looks like. Good. I think that the magenta is overpowering the blue. So I'm going to turn it down. This is to taste, just making it look how I like it. Let's see. Okay, cool. In the first photo I took, the magenta, when we switched it out, it was very bright and overpowering the scene. And the reason is we didn't change the power of the light initially, but the magenta gel wasn't absorbing as much light as the blue gel. Every different gel absorbs a different amount of light. So it's not like you can just interchange them as you wish. You will have to actually adjust the power. So originally, for what I was going for, what I thought was aesthetically pleasing, thought the magenta was too strong. So I turned the power down, and now we have a much moodier picture. So it's that rich magenta on one side and the rich blue on the other. I like this shot. I could shoot it and do something creative with it, but let's do something completely different, something a little bit new. Now, we could add rim lights and background lights in, but let's assume that you have a total of 3 lights. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce another light, one light, that's going to act as a background and 2 rim lights. So Stephen, would you bring in the 3x4 foot softbox? I do this often in my beauty photography. I will put a softbox behind the subject's head. And what that does is it gives me a pure white background, and then the light also wraps around so that it's illuminating the subject's jawline. And we center it a little more, great. Bring it over a tiny bit more, good. But can you bring it to your left, so towards the wall, the other way. There you go, good, perfect. All right, let's give this a test. All right, cool, beautiful. This is giving me a much more high key setup. High key means predominantly lighter tones. By putting that white softbox behind, you see that I've got that really nice rim light on her jawline and pure white background. So this gives me a little bit more upbeat feel instead of being so dark and dramatic like the previous shot. But I have another trick for you. So this is kind of a fun one. What we're going to do is we're actually going to gel that softbox. Now, you don't have to, but I just want to show you the effect. When you gel the softbox, what it's going to do is it's going to give you the 2 rim lights on either side of the jaw, but now it's going to have color. And because those lights are so bright, because the background is turned up, more or less, that softbox is still going to appear white, but the rim lights on the jaw will have color. So let's do, I've got blue, magenta, let's do like tealish green. We're going to add a 3rd color into this scene. All right, so you can see now that we've added that greenish teal gel, you can actually see what it's doing. You can look at her face and you see that color wrapping around. I've asked Stephen to turn up the power of that light a little bit because, again, gels absorb light. And so by turning it up, I'll make sure I actually can see some of that color. So let's take a shot and see what it looks like. Yeah, oh, beautiful, beautiful. So looking at this, I have 3 super saturated colors, but with a high key setup. And it looks as if I have 1, 2 lights, then a couple lights in the background, and then 2 different rim lights. So it looks like I have at least 5 lights, but I'm doing it all with just 3. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot this and get kind of the perfect shot.